The charismatic insurance salesman Truman Burbank lives peacefully on Sea Haven Island. The day his life begins to change, Truman greets his neighbors across the street with his traditional greeting of, "Good morning, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night," before a mysterious object falls from the sky and lands near him. Truman goes to investigate the mysterious object, and when Truman looks up, the sky is clear and offers no explanation. On his drive to work, the radio reports that an aircraft flying over the island shed parts, which leads Truman to believe that that is the source of the fallen object. When Truman returns home from work, he begins gardening. When his wife Meryl returns home, she reads to him all about the new kitchen utensils she purchased at the store. Truman promptly responds, as Meryl often enjoys telling Truman the new things she buys. Later that night, Truman is on the beach dreaming about one day leaving the island to go to Fiji when he remembers the boating trip that killed his father he went on as a child. As he comes out of the memory, it begins only to rain on Truman. He stands up in shock as the rest of the sky finally opens up in a downpour. The following morning, as Truman walks to work, he passes a homeless man on the street. Upon a closer look, he sees the homeless man looks just like his father. Before he can get to the man, a number of people in strange obstacles spontaneously appear, and the homeless man is taken away on a bus by men dressed in suits. After work, Truman tells his mom about the incident. She claims Truman is having wishful thinking and claims to experience the same thing, saying she sees his father at least 10 times a day. She insists Truman will have to face the facts and accept that his father is gone. That same night, after Truman retreats in his basement, his wife again name drops the brand to a new mower they should buy as he's repairing their old one. After she exits, he begins looking through old memories where he finds a red sweater belonging to the young woman he fell in love with in college. In the memory at the library, he learns her name is Lauren. Lauren tells Truman she is not allowed to talk to him. Despite this, Truman asks her if she'd like to go out with him sometime. Lauren pulls out a piece of paper and writes the word now, signifying if they do not leave now, it would never happen. The two secretly rush out of the library through a nearby exit. Truman and Lauren run towards the beach and they are able to share a moment of privacy. However, a vehicle approaches and Lauren becomes frantic. She tells Truman that her real name is Sylvia and tries to tell him the truth about his life. Suddenly, her father appears to collect her and tell Truman that she suffers from schizophrenia before announcing that they are moving to Fiji. The next day, as Truman is driving to work, the radio in Truman's car malfunctions and begins to strangely broadcast oddly specific movements that Truman happens to be making. Suddenly, a loud ringing is heard and everyone on the island holds their ears sharply. The radio explains the channel must have picked up a police frequency. Paranoid, Truman chooses to walk around in the open air instead. He enters a building and makes his way towards the elevator, and as the doors open, he is surprised to see an entrance to what seems to be a studio filled with people wearing headphones and eating sandwiches. Before he can register what he's seeing, security grabs him, explains they are remodeling the building, and pushes him out of the building for trespassing. Shook up, Truman tries to explain the strange experiences he's been going through to his best friend Marlon. Marlon just passes it off as Truman trying to be funny. Truman then confides in Marlon that he is secretly going to be going away for a while. Later that night, Truman returns home where he finds his wife and his mother together looking at an old photo album. As they leave, the TV begins playing an old film that reassures the notion that nobody ever needs to leave home to find out the wonders of the world. As Truman looks back through the photo album, he sees that his wife's fingers are crossed in their wedding photo, indicating that it was a false marriage. Truman goes to a travel agency the next day to book a flight to Fiji. The agent tells him that there are no available flights for at least a month. When he tries to take a bus to Chicago, the bus breaks down before it can even leave the station. All of these events begin weighing on Truman's mind, so when Meryl returns home, she finds Truman sitting in his car in the driveway, oddly fixated on something. As she sits with him, he begins to predict the appearance of every person along the street, as if they were on a fixed schedule. As his behavior begins to worry his wife, Truman puts his theory to a bigger test by driving down the street. When they come to a rotary, a traffic jam suddenly appears. Truman takes the car around the rotary multiple times, and when he comes back to the jam, all the cars have vanished. He continues driving to the only bridge that leads off the island. Due to Truman's fear of water, he closes his eye and slams on the gas, forcing his wife Meryl to drive over the bridge. Victorious, they pass a sign warning of forest fires and a line of flames shoot across the road, but Truman continues onward. The car is finally stopped just beyond a power plant that appears to have experienced a meltdown. Men in hazmat suits approach the car and apologize for the inconvenience when one of them accidentally calls Truman by his first name. Truman gets out of the car and tries to make a break for it before the men chase after him and manage to return him to the island. When they return home, Meryl tries to comfort Truman by brand dropping a new drink she picked up. However, this time Truman realizes it is almost like a promotion. Upsetting Truman, he asks who she is talking to. Truman frantically tries to convince Meryl that there's something wrong with everything. Meryl becomes scared and picks up a peeler and tells him to keep his distance. When he takes the peeler away from her and puts her in a lockhold, she calls out for someone to help her. Truman, in shock, releases her and demands to know what's going on. Marlon appears casually with a case of beer and Meryl runs into his arms, crying. To calm Truman down, Marlon takes him out for some beer and tells him he would never lie to him and that he's found the homeless man Truman was telling him about. As the man approaches, Truman realizes it's his father and they embrace, his father telling him that he would make up for lost time. The next morning, Truman appears to be well and back to his normal self. He greets his neighbors and heads off to work. That evening, Truman reorganizes his basement and pulls the cover on a makeshift bed and falls asleep. After several hours of sleep, Marlon walks in and goes to the basement, only to find a noise recorder and a hole in the basement floor. The entire island searches for Truman when suddenly the sun rises out of nowhere. Truman is located on a lone sailboat. Suddenly, there is a gigantic storm to entice Truman to go back to port. However, Truman yells to the skies in defiance. As the weather stops, Truman collects himself and finds that the bow of the boat has lodged into a wall, just as the sky. As Truman examines the wall, he finds a short staircase leading to an exit door. As he reaches for the handle, a voice comes from the sky, who introduces themselves as the creator. The creator reveals that Truman's life is a TV show that has been going on since he was born that provides entertainment for the entire world. The creator tries to convince Truman to stay in a world that is free of pain and violence. Truman appears deep in thought, and the creator suggests he say something because after all, the entire world is watching due to the show's popularity. After Truman thinks, he looks up and says, "In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night." He bows, opens the door, and leaves the set into the real world. The saddened creator removes his headpiece and cuts the transmission as the rest of the world cheers tremendously at the finale of The Truman Show. And that's all. Director Peter Wier writes for The Truman Show. If you enjoyed this fast flick, leave a thumbs up and comment what you thought about the movie. And as always, have a good rest of your night. And if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and I'm just kidding.